No more Mr. Nice Guy. What's going on, guys? So, Shocker came out back in 1989. It was directed by one of my all-time favorite horror directors, Wes Craven. And it stars Peter Berg and Mitch Pileggi. And it follows Horace Pinker, a notorious serial killer who is caught by authorities and is put to death by the electric chair. However, he manages to escape death by transferring his soul from body to body. So, let's get into the positives of Shocker. First and foremost, the story. I like the whole concept of this killer, this deranged man, managing to elude death, to escape death, just so he can live and create more havoc by transferring his soul from body to body. It's like a possession movie. This is a supernatural slasher film, which made it perfect.
What's the problem, Pastore? You shut your fucking face, shithead! Get down on the ground! Now!
Pinker? Let you shoot me like a dog?
Then eat this, asshole!
Not that I have my problems with it, but I like that whole concept. And this college football player, played by Peter Berg, is caught up in the middle of all this. His girlfriend dies because of this man, killing her off, and he tries to get his revenge by wanting to see him get killed, have the electric chair. But, things don't always turn out the way you want it. So, this guy, Horace Pinker, he manages to elude death, pretty much, and I like that whole concept. Especially the whole who can you trust thing about this. The look and feel was pretty good. As cheesy as it became, as it was, which I'll get into later, I like the whole fact that this football player, whose name is Jonathan, he has these visions. He has these nightmares of things to come, which kind of reminds me of a crossing mixed in with A Nightmare on Elm Street and Final Destination. Even though Final Destination didn't come out like 11 years later, it had a lot of that concept in it too. Because the people in that franchise, in the Final Destination franchise, had visions of what was to come. And that's what the guy in this film basically had. So that's why I tie it in. Even though this movie came out before the Final Destination films, it still had a little bit of the Nightmare on Elm Street element in it as well, which, look who directed it. It's kind of obvious there. It had its vicious moments that only the gifted and very talented Wes Craven could only deliver, which I will circle back to him later. And speaking of viciousness, Horace Pinker, the villain of this film, played by Mitch Pileggi. He gave a pretty good performance. As I said, this had a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street elements in it. So this guy, he kind of reminded me of a much more vicious, much bolder Freddy Krueger. You would see in his persona like bits and pieces of Freddy in this guy. He wasn't like the joking type. He was more like bold. And he was more straightforward in what he would send out. It was pretty vicious.
Open up!
Finger licking good. He held nothing back. Mitch Pileggi, I think he's a pretty cool actor. I've seen him in other stuff, preferably Supernatural, which is the only other thing I've seen him in the most. But in this film, he played that villain pretty good, down to a T. No remorse, no emotions. A character of this magnitude, you think the devil himself made him. That's putting it pretty mildly. And the direction, oh man, what can I say? Wes Craven will always be in my top list of favorite directors. He's the guy that introduced me, and I know I'm talking like I've already met him, which if I ever did fall into Hollywood, which I don't really see myself doing, but if I ever did fall into Hollywood, that'd be like one of my top regrets, never being able to meet him since he died back in 2015. That hit me hard because he's the one that introduced me to Scream, which is the whole reason why I got into horror. He's pretty much my inspiration, and I thought he did a pretty decent job in this film. It wasn't perfect. Wes Craven, as much as I loved this man's work, he still had some duds, and unfortunately this kind of falls into that category. But the direction was solid. up until a point. Which brings me to the negatives. Peter Berg. I didn't quite care for his character in this. He's the main character. He plays Jonathan, as I mentioned before, the teenager that gets caught up in all this mess, and he tries to figure out what's going on and why these people are acting so strange around him and why people are trying to kill him. It's like, oh, Horace Pinker's supernaturally possessing these people. My friends, my family, my coach, my best friend, this and that. But his acting, I just couldn't get into it. And I hate bashing an actor, but his acting was just atrocious. I will say this much. I'm glad that he found his calling anyway. Since this movie was made, he's made a name for himself. And he's become a mildly, I wouldn't say like popular director. One that makes a movie like every year, or like 1 or 2 movies every year. But he still found his calling in Hollywood, which I'm glad. And I think he does better as a director than an actor. He makes cameos in some of the movies that he makes now. But to me, I think that's good enough. I still think he's talented. It's just acting wasn't really his strong suit, especially in this film. Which brings me to overacting. That's kind of what he did. I felt like he pushed too hard, and especially some of the other characters. I think some of the other actors just pushed way too hard in what they were doing. And I really don't think they needed to try that hard. If they didn't push themselves, I think it would have been just a tad bit better. At certain points, I don't think the film knew what it wanted to be. There's one scene in the first act which kind of made me scratch my head, where Lieutenant Don Parker, played by Michael Murphy, who was supposedly Peter Berg's character father, they have this place surrounded where the killer is set up. They found him, and they start getting picked off one by one. And when they find the first victim, he's laid out sprawled in the chair with his throat slit, blood everywhere, and the guy still checks his pulse. I'm thinking, you must be dense, because if you find a person in that position, there's no reason for you to check his pulse. He's going to be dead. It's like they didn't have no common sense for some reason. But luckily, that's the only corpse he did that to. If he'd have kept doing that, I probably would have turned it off and then watched it later, just so I could get my thoughts straight. The whole Alice ghost concept, Alice was the girlfriend of the main character, of Peter Berg's character. She gets killed earlier on in the first act, which sets up the movie pretty much, and sets up Peter Berg's hate for this guy. But the way they play the ghost off later on is a little cheesy. Now, I get that this character was supposed to be the light, was supposed to be the weakness of Horace Pinker, of, the good versus evil. I get that. But I feel like that if they just wrote that ghost off as a light and not actually show her, be more mysterious, but somehow deep into Peter Berg's character's heart, that he knew what this entity was, different from what Horace Pinker was. I think it would have boded well if they'd have just done with that. I think that would have been more effective. But instead, they kind of went a little cheesy route, especially the lake scene when he was trying to supposedly get that necklace back that Horace Pinker threw in the lake earlier. That's basically as effective against Horace Pinker's spirit. Somehow, this necklace is a means of it's like a weapon. So he was in the lake trying to find it, and then the ghost of Alice all of a sudden appears and goes after him, and it just, I don't know, it just didn't fare well. But I just feel like if they'd have just made that character a bright light, like from heaven or something, and just shined, it probably would have been more effective. But that's just me. And the visuals. Oh, God. Must talk visuals. I get that this movie came out before the digital age, before digital effects. This was in 1989, so digital effects didn't really come into play until like the mid-90s, I'm guessing. But this was at an age where digital effects wasn't really around. You had to wing it. You did the best you could. But there was a certain point that in this film, it just made me chuckle to the bone. I mean, I couldn't stop laughing. I was crying. If it wasn't bad enough that I felt like the whole Horace Pinker ghost, the way he looked, I get that they were trying to make it look like electrifying because that's how he died. And that's what they wanted the spirit to look like, but it just looked cheesy. But I've got to talk about the finale. When Peter Berg's character and Horace Pinker, Mitch Pileggi's character, was fighting, they were basically in the TV, going through all these different channels. You've seen like Leave It to Beaver. They were running past the car that they were driving, and then like they would change the channel, and it'd show like a nuclear apocalyptic world that they were fighting in, and then they would change the channel again, and then it would be like them falling from the air. It just, oh man, that whole scene just made I just about died laughing. Up to this point, now there was like other cheesy moments that I had mentioned before, but up to this point, it was trying to be serious, but at the same time, it was tripping all over itself, kind of like a drunken pirate high on weed. So bottom line, if you're a fan of Wes Craven and just wants to settle down with a cold beer and just turn your brain off, enjoy this film for its sour afterflavor. So, shocker, have you seen it yet? You must have. Did you find it enjoyable? Did you like the story? Or did you find it lacking? You didn't think it was Wes Craven's best? Leave me your comment down below and give me your thoughts. I know I've been doing a lot of horror movies here lately. I've got more, and I'll move on to like other genres here soon, but for now, get ready. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you hadn't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace, the Reptastic.